Late at night in telecom, Gerhard stared anxiously at the computer console. He typed in more instructions, then walked to a printout typewriter and began reviewing the long sheaf of green striped sheets. He scanned them quickly, looking for the error he knew was there in the programmed instructions. The computer itself never made a mistake. Gerhard had used computers for nearly 10 years, different computers, different places, and he had never seen one make a mistake. Of course, mistakes occurred all the time. They were always in the program, not in the machine. Sometimes that infallibility was hard to accept. For one thing, it didn't fit with one's view of the rest of the world, where machines were always making mistakes, fuses blowing, stereos breaking down, ovens overheating, cars refusing to start. Modern man expected machines to make their fair share of errors, but computers were different. Working with them could be a humiliating experience. They were never wrong. It was as simple as that. Even when it took weeks to find the source of some problem, even when the problem was checked by a dozen times by as many different people, when the whole staff was slowly coming to the conclusion that for once the computer circuitry had fouled up. It always turned out in the end to be a human error of some kind. Anyways, Richards came in, shaking off a sport coat, and poured himself a cup of coffee. "How's it going?" Gerhard shook his head. "I'm having trouble with George." "Again? Shit." Richard looked at the console. "How's Martha?" "Martha's fine, I think. It's just George." "Which George is it?" "St. George," Gerhard said. "Billy a bit." Richards sipped his coffee and sat down at a console. Mind if I try it?" "Sure," Gerhard said. Richards began flicking buttons. He called up the program for St. George. Then he called up in the program for Martha. Then he pushed up into action button. Richards and Gerhard hadn't devised these programs. They were modified from several existing computer programs developed at other universities. But the basic idea was the same. To create a computer program that would make the computer act emotionally, like people. It was logical to designate the programs with names like George and Martha. There's a precedent for that. Eliza in Boston and Aldous in England. George and Martha was essentially the same program, with slight differences. The original George was programmed to be neutral in his response to stimuli. Then Martha was created. Martha was a little bitchy. Martha disliked most things. Finally, another George was formulated, a very loving George, who was referred to as St. George. Each program could respond with 3 emotional states: love, fear, and anger. Each could produce 3 actions: approach, withdrawal, and attack. All this was, of course, highly abstract. It was carried out in terms of numbers. For example, the original George was neutral to most numbers, but he disliked the number 751. He was programmed to dislike it, and by extension, he disliked similar numbers, 743, 742, and so on. He much preferred numbers such as 404, 133, and 918. If you punched in one of those numbers, George responded with numbers signifying love and approach. If you punched in 707, George withdrew. If you punched in 750, George angrily attacked, according to the numbers he printed out. The NPS staff had played with the programs in this way for a long time. When they had incorporated program modifications to allow for talk from the computer, the numbers were translated into sentences. This was amusing and revealing. The actual interaction was referred to as the Christmas game, because most of it was conducted as giving and receiving gifts, objects that had an assigned or learned emotional value, just as the numbers did. Normal George interacting with Martha would eventually win her over, and her bitchiness would recede into the background. But St. George had a much worse effect on her. His loving acceptance drove her up the wall. That is, if things were working normally. Richards watched as the printout flashed across the screen. "Hello, I'm St. George." "Hello, what is your name?" "Martha." "You don't say much, Martha." "No." "But I like you." "Why I don't like you?" "I understand that. How can I help?" "It isn't printing periods consistently," Richard said. "When did this start?" "That's nothing," Gerhard said. "Just keep watching." "Help. Yes, I would like to help you. Have a cat." Richards winced. Cats were programmed to be something that both George and Martha disliked. Giving George a cat was a very hostile move. "Thank you. Have another cat." "Thank you. You are very kind." "Have another cat." "No, thank you." "Don't you like cats?" "Yes, but I have enough cats." "Have a gorilla." "Really nasty," Richard said. "What are the other interactions like?" "Pretty much the same," Gerhard said. "As bad as this?" "Pretty much." They were accustomed now to the idea that when the computers interacted, the results were unpredictable. The general form of interaction could be guessed, but the specific results were uncertain. It was like a computer playing checkers. It was probably going to win, but it would win a different way each time, depending on what the opponent did. "I don't want a gorilla." "Don't you like gorillas?" "No, thank you. You are too polite." I'm sorry if I offended you in any way. You talk too much. I am sorry. Have an eggplant. Richards watched them with interest. St. George had no background for eggplants, but he disliked cucumbers and bananas. No, thank you. Don't you like eggplant? Not very much. Here, have another one. No, thank you. I want you to have it. No, thank you. Go on and take it. No, thank you. I insist. No, thank you. What's happened to St. George? Richards asked. His responses are too much the same. That's what's bothering me. What's he cycling through on the program? I was looking for it when you came in. I insist that you have a cucumber. I refuse. George, Richards said almost without thinking. Then have a banana. No, George is breaking down, Richards said. He's not a saint anymore. Then have both a banana and a cucumber. No, thank you. I insist. Go to hell. I will kill you. The screen was filled up with white dots. What does that mean? Unprintable response, Richard said. I don't know. I've never seen it before tonight. How many times has this program been run? Richard asked. 110 against Martha. Any learning erasures? No. I'll be goddamned, Richard said. He's getting to be a short-tempered saint. He grinned. He can write this one up. Gerhard nodded and went back to the printout. In theory, what was happening was not puzzling. Both George and Martha were programmed to learn from experience, like the checkers playing programs, where the machine got better each time it played a game. And this program was established so that the machine would learn new responses to things. After 110 sets of experience, St. George had abruptly stopped being saint. He was learning not to be a saint around Martha, even though he had been programmed for saintliness. I know just how he feels, Richards said, and switched the machine off. Then he joined Gerhard, looking for the programming error that had made it all possible.